The case of H. Holmes, America's first serial killer and his murder castle. Herman Webster Mudgett, who would later become known as H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. He spent his childhood in a tiny rural milieu. The early years of his life did not provide any clues about the horrific figure that he would eventually become. Holmes was a bright but shy youngster who was frequently tormented at school. He was the son of a strict father and a devoted mother. His peers allegedly coerced him into touching a human skeleton, which is said to have been the beginning of his preoccupation with anatomy and death dating back to his childhood. After the episode, Holmes had a peculiar sense of interest rather than dread, which may have been the impetus for his lifelong preoccupation with death and dissection techniques. Following his enrollment at Phillips Exeter Academy, Holmes tied the knot with Clara Lovering in the year 1878, when he was only 17 years old. However, the marriage swiftly deteriorated. After that, he went on to study medicine at the University of Vermont. After that, he transferred to the medical school at the University of Michigan, where he became renowned for stealing cadavers from the laboratory at the university. These bodies would be used by Holmes to commit life insurance scams, in which he would claim that the victims had died as a result of accidents, and then collect the payouts. When he first began engaging in fraudulent activity, it was clear that he was willing to take advantage of both live and deceased people for financial benefit. During his time in medical school, Holmes further reinforced his image as a savvy manipulator among the medical community. Through the course of his life, he honed his ability to persuade others to carry out his wishes, a skill that he would eventually perfect. Following the completion of his education, he left his wife and child behind, going to a number of different places while using a variety of aliases, indulging in minor scams, and even working as a pharmacist. During this time period, it is speculated that Holmes may have committed his initial killings. Nevertheless, the specifics of these murders continue to be a mystery. Holmes arrived in Chicago in the year 1886, a city that was experiencing fast growth and was on the verge of holding the World's Columbian Exposition in the year 1893. It was in this location that he would establish his most notorious business venture, a hotel that would subsequently be referred to as the Murder Castle. In the beginning, the building was a straightforward acquisition of a drugstore in the Englewood neighborhood. However, it quickly grew into a vast, three-story behemoth that occupied an entire city block. Holmes was personally responsible for overseeing its construction, and he often fired and replaced builders in order to guarantee that no one was aware of the building's whole orientation. The end result was a nightmare that was very similar to a labyrinth. Halls that led nowhere, staircases that ended suddenly, doors that opened to brick walls, and concealed chutes that delivered bodies directly into the basement. For the purpose of accommodating guests who were attending the World's Fair, the upper floors of the Murder Castle were meant to function as a hotel. The genuine aim of the edifice, on the other hand, was somewhat more evil. It contained rooms that were equipped with gas pipes, airtight vaults, and soundproof chambers, which enabled Holmes to asphyxiate his victims without being discovered. Surgical tables, vats of acid, lime pits, and a cremation were all present in the basement, which was an even more unsettling location than the rest of the building. Through the use of his medical skills, Holmes would dissect his victims and then sell their bones to medical institutions. This was a technique that not only made him financially successful, but also helped him conceal evidence of his criminal activities. Women made up the majority of Holmes' victims, and many of them were young, single, and new to the city, which made them particularly susceptible to being victimized. In addition to enticing women to work for him or rent rooms in his hotel, he advertised employment openings in the newspapers of the area. Through the use of his inherent charm, Holmes would woo or manipulate these women, and he would frequently be successful in persuading them to hand over their insurance policies and savings accounts to him. Once Holmes determined that they were no longer useful, he would place them in one of the death traps that were located within the castle, where they would be subjected to a torturous and terrible death. Some of them were put to death by being gassed, some by being starved or smothered, while still others were subjected to torture or experimentation before they were put to death. Julia Smythe, who was the wife of one of Holmes' work associates, was one of the most notorious victims of the detective. Julia became pregnant after Holmes began an affair with her, and he made a commitment to marry her after she became pregnant. Holmes, however, murdered both her and her small daughter, and then disposed of their bodies without leaving any evidence. This occurred when she insisted on getting married. Because of the ephemeral character of life in the bustling metropolis, the disappearances of Julia and her daughter were originally disregarded. This was owing to the fact that people came and went, frequently without questioning their presence. For a number of years, Holmes' atrocities were mostly overlooked, since they were concealed beneath the mask of respectability that he presented. His operations were perfectly concealed by the World's Fair in Chicago, which was a spectacular celebration of the progress that had been made in the industrial sector. There were thousands of tourists who came to the city, and Holmes' hotel was able to accommodate a significant number of these tourists. However, some of these tourists would never be seen again. His murder spree occurred during a period of time when law enforcement was in its infancy, and incidents of missing persons were frequently disregarded. This was especially true in cases involving young ladies who were believed to have traveled out of town on their own volition. Holmes was infamous for his deceptions and hoaxes, despite the fact that his killings were among the most terrible in history. His fraudulent activities included cheating creditors, insurance organizations, and business partners. He engaged in a multitude of frauds. In the course of his many fraudulent schemes, he devised a scheme to deceive insurance companies by pretending that his accomplice, Benjamin Petzel, had passed away. Holmes and Petzel had devised a scheme to make it appear as though Petzel had been killed in an accident. After that, Holmes would then receive the money from the insurance company. On the other hand, Holmes betrayed his partner by killing Petzel in a direct manner and then collected the reward for himself. It turned out that Holmes's downfall was brought on by the murders of Petzel and his children, who were also killed by Holmes. In November of 1894, Holmes was taken into custody for insurance fraud when a Philadelphia insurance firm became suspicious of him. An inquiry was launched as a result of the arrest, which led to the discovery of Holmes' broad web of illicit activity. Frank Geyer, a detective from the Pinkerton Police Department, followed Holmes' trail and eventually found the bodies of Petzel's children. Holmes had murdered and concealed the bodies of the children in various sites across the Midwest. After Holmes was taken into custody, his macabre empire started to fall apart. In the course of their investigation, the investigators searched the murder castle and discovered its horrible secrets. Despite the fact that it was hard to ascertain the precise number of individuals that Holmes had murdered, estimates varied from 17 to more than 200. Holmes admitted to being responsible for 27 killings. However, many of his confessions were riddled with inconsistencies and embellishments, making it difficult to differentiate between reality and fiction with regard to his statements. The nation was enthralled by the trial of Holmes, which began in the year 1895. The public was appalled by the gory details of his murders, as well as by his placid demeanor, which was practically oblivious to the situation. It was with a frigid detachment that he delivered his confessions, and he frequently spoke about his victims, as if they were nothing more than objectified things. Holmes was found guilty of the murder of Benjamin Petzel and put to death, despite the fact that he was charming and intelligent. Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia was the location where Holmes was executed by hanging on May 7, 1896. Even in the dying minutes of his life, Holmes maintained an unsettlingly calm demeanor, despite the fact that his passing puts an end to one of the most infamous criminal careers in the history of the United States. The mythology of H.H. Holmes has only risen in the years that have passed since his passing. Shortly after his execution, the murder castle itself was inexplicably destroyed by fire, which erased a significant portion of the tangible proof of his crimes. The grisly mythology of the murder castle, on the other hand, has endured so long that it has become an important episode in the history of true crime in the United States. Both the field of criminal psychology and the field of studies on serial killers have been irrevocably altered as a result of Holmes' case. He had characteristics that would later be discovered in other prominent murders, such as superficial charm, a lack of empathy, and a sophisticated ability to deceive. He is frequently considered to be one of the first examples of a psychopathic serial killer, using the anonymity and turmoil of urban life. Holmes was able to carry out his criminal activities. He did this by exploiting a society that was undergoing rapid change, with new technologies and modern conveniences serving to conceal the more sinister truths that lay under the surface. There have been a great number of novels, films, and documentaries that have been inspired by H.H. Holmes in the decades that have passed since his death. He has become a person that is both historically and culturally fascinating. His narrative exemplifies the junction of modernity and monstrosity, a point at which progress and horror met in a manner that continues to grab the imagination of the general public. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.